Why hello, and welcome to New Year's Eve. And with New Year's Eve, we get some top 10 list. Woo! Everybody loves top 10 lists. This is my big-ish list of games that I thought were pretty damn awesome in 2018. Do note that these are not games that were necessarily released in 2018, just games that I played in 2018. I am a busy guy, alright? Also note, these are my personal favourites from a longer list of games that I did really enjoy. But it is my opinion. If you disagree with my opinion, that's great. Leave a comment below about which games you thought should be on this list, etc, etc. Don't just drop a dislike because you don't agree that I put X on instead of Y. This is how opinions work. Save that for videos you actually dislike rather than things on the list that you don't agree with, okay? Those are different things. Don't be a dick. Anyway, let's get this baby started. Number 10. At number 10, we have Cyanide Studios' Call of Cthulhu, which, even now, a month or two after release, leaves me with oddly mixed feelings. On one hand, I love what they were trying to do with the game. There was atmosphere oozing from it, and the story, although feeling a little derivative in places, was nevertheless pretty engaging. The visuals and soundtrack were excellent, most for creating a real sense of ambience and atmosphere, despite some rather janky animations in places, especially facial animations. And there were some standout moments of gameplay as well, but also just as many sections that felt a little off about things. For example, the stealth section in the basement of the hospital, or the shooting section at the end, which really didn't feel particularly good. But for all the positives that I have to say about the game and its multiple endings and the atmosphere and just the general storytelling, there was one thing that still to this day frustrates me. Call of Cthulhu was a story-heavy and a story-driven game and a text-heavy game. An awful lot of reading was necessary and involved, and unfortunately, because the game's story, I think, was written in French originally and translated into English, there were a lot of errors in the text. And for a story-driven game and for a text-heavy game, for me, I think the constant spelling and grammar errors is a fairly unforgivable thing to happen. Nevertheless, really enjoyable game. One I would recommend to any fans of Lovecraft or the horror genre in general, especially at a sale price. Number 9. World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. Ooh, now I know what you're thinking. I know you've already got your finger on the mouse and you're looking at that dislike button. Hold on a second. I know that me including this on any kind of top 10 list for 2018 is a fairly controversial and unpopular opinion. I know that Battle for Azeroth has received an awful lot of negative criticism, but I really like a lot of the things that Blizzard did with BFA. I mean, I can't stand the faction war stuff because it's a worn out trope for me. It's been done again and again and again, and I don't really like the fact that it is back, but the war campaign has been a reasonably solid piece of storytelling with some decent moments, and the storytelling really is what has held up BFA for me. That and the fact that a lot of the aesthetic and zone design of the game has been really, really good, especially Drustvar. I said this in my playthrough. I kind of wish that I hadn't started with Drustvar, because after Drustvar, the other two Alliance zones didn't feel as cohesive, but Drustvar, excellent and enjoyable zone. All in all, Battle for Azeroth for me is a solid expansion, but it's also reached those Warlords of Draenor levels of controversy. due to several systems in the game that people just hate. As somebody who doesn't PvP nor raid, I don't really mind the Azeroth system at all. It's just little extra bonuses and buffs that pop up for me. I'm fine with that. But it's a massive source, and I do appreciate that for a lot of people it's a big deal. I have played several classes, and I've got several classes now at the cap. Druid, Monk and Priest, Priest are the three main. And once again, I found myself gravitating back to that my good old Druid, which I did the majority of my achievements in the game on, despite, of course, switching everything up at the start of the expansion to play as a Discipline Priest instead, for the first time ever. And I did spend a long time unlocking both Dark Iron Dwarves and Void Elves in order to be able to play these races in BFA. And, you know, it was a bit grindy, but it's an MMO, and that's what they are. They are designed to be a little bit grindy. So I'm currently waiting for 8.1.5 for the Cthulhu Druids to be, well, the Cthulhu allied race to be released, but the Cthulhu Druids specifically, because I want to play a Wicker Bear, or a Wicker Cat, or some kind of weird Wicker Chicken thing. Number 8. Oh look! Another really unpopular opinion. Number 8. Final Fantasy 15, the Windows/Royal Edition. An unpopular opinion, this one, but I really enjoyed Final Fantasy 15. I played through pretty much the entire game, either on stream or on YouTube. And I liked what it was trying to do. I liked what they managed to do, considering the massive constraints that they had for time that Tabata, the director, was put under. I liked the story. I liked the camaraderie between the main characters. The story itself felt pretty enjoyable for me, and I was especially fond of the fact that they fleshed it out a bit more with the Royal Edition by adding in new cutscenes, new explanation, and rounding things out with the episodic DLC. My one big gripe that I've got is still the same as it was in the original edition that I played back on the PS4, which was that Luna as a character felt horribly shortchanged. And I'm pretty bummed, actually, that we won't get to see her side of the story due to the cancellation of the episode Luna DLC that was planned for next year. That is, in my opinion, a big, big shame. We are still getting episode Arden, though, and he was kind of my favourite character in the entire game, possibly thanks to Darren DePaul's voice acting, but yeah, I'm looking forward to at least having that chunk of the story fleshed out a little bit more. Number 7. Vermintide 2. Fat Shark's original Vermintide game was a glitchy, buggy, fun mess. I managed about 17 hours of it, according to Steam, before I couldn't convince my friends to play with me any longer, and because the bots were so terrible, yeah, I wasn't going to play it on my own. Vermintide 2, on the other hand, has much better bots. It's a pretty darn stable game. I've got over 30 hours now out of it already, and it's a really good game for that odd hour of time that you've got. You do need about an hour. Half an hour might not be enough, but you probably can't get 2 missions worth in an hour. Visually, the game is stunning. It's superb. There's some really, really gorgeous places in the game, especially the big cornfield, which looked really good actually in the Halloween event where everything was under the full moon. Everything looked really, really different, and it runs really well even on the 1070 GTX that I've got in this system. The gameplay is fun and exciting, and I'm sure it isn't if you've run missions like dozens and dozens and dozens of times and it's just a big grind for you, but that's kind of the nature of grinding. One thing that I do really, really applaud Fat Shark for is the addition of proper subclasses for characters. So I can now be the the more tanky sword and board characters that I really enjoy playing, and I can just stand there in the thick of things with my shield up, and my mates behind me can be shooting arrows or throwing fireballs or stabbing people over my head. And I think that's great. I think that's good design. Yeah, it means that I don't get many of those kind of green circles on the scoreboard at the end. But thanks to me, partially thanks to me, no, totally thanks to me, we managed to finish the mission. Nobody died. And that's great. So I think Vermintide 2 really does deserve a place on this list. It's brilliant stuff, especially with one or more friends. Good stuff. Death to the Ratty Boys. Number 6. Iconoclasts. It took me ages, I must admit, to get my head around what actually happened in Iconoclasts. And I say that, and I even now when I was scripting this out, I really struggled to get my thoughts down about Iconoclasts. It was one of the first games I played this year, and it's an impressive game for a number of reasons. First of all, it's got really excellent pixel art. It looks really good. An awful lot of care has clearly been put into it. Same goes for the level design. The levels are really well thought out. They're really well paced. They're really well constructed. And for me, the best mark of a game having done that as a Metroidvania is that I've wanted to make a map for it, and of course I have made one for Iconoclasts, which is available over on Steam. So great level design, really catchy soundtrack, and all of it made by one guy. That is like stupidly impressive. But more importantly to me, above all of those things, is that it attempted for Metroidvania, to go above and beyond in telling a deep story with a lot of allegory, with a lot of thought and nuance behind it. A lot of Metroidvania games attempt to tell stories, but Iconoclasts really tries to one-up many of them with a tale that in places is really quite heart-wrenching, even if it isn't always really clear what's going on. And that's not in the kind of omitted information style of storytelling way, more I feel like I should understand what's going on from the stuff that's been presented, but I'm not sure I quite get it kind of way. And that is how I would sum up the story of Iconoclasts. I could see that it was really trying to make us think about things, but I didn't quite in places get it. And as a reasonably smart guy, sometimes that can rankle me a little bit. You know, the idea that, oh, I don't get that, I don't understand that, it's unusual, without meaning to sound, egotistical and big-headed. Just a little bit of extra explanation and clarity, I think, would have been useful there. So great bosses, very distinctive visual style, an amazing effort from a one-man dev. If you like Metroidvania games, it is an absolute blast. It's a must purchase for me. And even if you don't, it is a really good game. Number 5, Guacamelee 2. Speaking of Metroidvania games, Guacamelee, the original, was one of my favourite games in the Metroidvania genre for quite some time. And this year, Drinkbox Games brought out a sequel. You get to return to the Lycra Tights of Juan, a few years after he defeats the first game's main villain, Calica. And he gets roped this time into a dimension and timeline travelling spanning adventure, where he needs not only to save the world, but the entire Mexiverse as well. And I love that idea. I love the concept of the Mexiverse and the multiple different timelines and the little differences between them and the in-jokes and the references that were made because of it. The game is gorgeous. It's got a really great visual style to it. It's got really catchy music, and it has got, for the most part, buttery smooth controls. And it's freaking hilarious. I didn't have the face cam and stuff set up for Guac 2, but I imagine that if I did, you'd have found me rolling my eyes and shaking my head as the dank memes pile up, or grinning like a real idiot at some of the dialogue, or, I don't know, just making WTF faces at all the stuff with the chicken Illuminati. Because what? What? Drinkbox? What are you on? Quack 2, like its predecessor, is a very, very combat-focused game. And it's really fun combat, and it does just enough new stuff to really raise it, in my opinion, above the first game in a noticeable way. And that's great. And you can play most of the game in chicken form, if you want to. Yep, chicken form. Enough said. Number 4, Unworthy. If ever there was an appropriate title for a video game and how it made me feel, it's this one. Unworthy got me the saltiest, I think, of basically any game I've played this year, save for competitive Overwatch, which I'm not talking about because... Unworthy is another. It's the second on this list, one-man developed game, and it's a Dark Souls-inspired 2D Metroidvania game with stamina-based combat and no ability to jump, which is important. That was one of its main selling points, that you couldn't jump in it. It's a platformer without the ability to jump between platforms, which sounds bizarre, and yet actually, once you get into the game and you try it out, it really works. It's got a very distinctive, dark aesthetic, graphical style. Everything is in shades of grey, black and white, with ever so occasional splashes of red. The blood in the game is red, though not all enemies bleed red. And that really, really impressed me. And I do recommend just watching videos of Unworthy, because it's interesting to look at and listen to. It's also really, really hard. And because this is me, I made the game a lot harder than I needed to by going into areas massively underleveled and then moaning about stuff and getting really salty about the stuff rather than getting good and figuring stuff out like a sensible human being. I just butted my head against the difficulty of the game and hoped I'd be able to make my way through it. And in a lot of places I didn't, and in a lot of places I raged and I got salty and I quit out, and then I came back to the area later on with a few extra levels or maybe a different weapon, and it wasn't an issue. And that's what I've always liked about Souls style games, that challenge and thinking, I just need to get better, I just need to use my head. Like I did in other games this year, I just need to take a step backwards and reevaluate. So I really loved Unworthy. It's not a game without its niggles. There's been a couple of big patches this year that really helped round out the level system, and there was talk of a weapon swapping wheel being added to the game, but I know that the dev suffered a rather severe family emergency not long after launch, and I don't know whether they are actively working on the game anymore, whether it will ever get integrated, because weapon swapping is kind of necessary to progress in places, but it's quite clunky in the game as it stands. But family first. Family first. If there's a family emergency, you know, that's got to come first, always. So nevertheless, Unworthy, absolutely great game. I still listen to its soundtrack even now, several months on, which is very, very much a Souls-inspired, like big, rousing boss themes, very orchestral, very epic. It's a game that wears its inspiration on its grayscale sleeves. Number 3. Vaporum. An odd choice, some might say, but not if you know a bit about me. Some of my earliest memories of gaming revolve around dungeon crawler games. I've always been interested in stories and dungeons. You know, I'm a typical geek in the sense that I did a lot of RPG stuff as a kid, Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, etc, etc. And I just fancied playing one this year. What I actually wanted to play was Black Crypt, which is one of the first dungeon crawlers I ever played. It's also the one, incidentally, that the name Demajen comes from. And over the last few years, I've played Legend of Grimrock and Legend of Grimrock 2. Really enjoyed both of them. And then Vaporum just caught my eye randomly on Steam one day, and it sold itself as a steampunk dungeon crawler. And it was just the right thing that I wanted to play at that time, which I think is why it stuck with me. It's one of the reasons why it stuck with me. Vaporum it's an incredible, really well-paced dungeon crawling experience. It's got a good story, it's got fun systems, it's got solid combat, and as I've said multiple times in my playthrough of it, it's got an absolutely amazing lighting engine. The game's lighting engine is freaking gorgeous. It is an atmospheric and it's quite pulpy dungeon crawler with this steampunk aesthetic. It's almost Bioshock in nature, but it does take you on a journey. Unlike a lot of dungeon crawlers where you play as a party of 4, this is a solo experience. You play as a guy and you find out more about him as you go, with some pretty interesting story beats and twists later on, which obviously I'm not going to spoil here. I think there's also a fair chunk of replayability in the game as well. I haven't replayed it, but I actually do plan to give it another go, because there are character classes in the game. So rather than a party of 4 who you give different classes to, you just play as the one guy, so you can only play one class per run. I played using the Thorma rig, which was a class that concentrated on using gadgets. So it's basically kind of a mage, but with gadgets rather than spells. And I absolutely loved it. I had a blast playing it. There's plenty of story, lots of collectibles, loads of secrets, including some really obtuse ones that I barely found, and probably some that... No, I can't say that I wouldn't have found, because I think I did find all of them in the end, before the end, because it does tell you how many secrets that you found on each level. So I went searching for them before moving on, which is probably why my playthrough is a little bit longer than it necessarily might have been. So yeah, plenty of good stuff, and all of that's just added up to one of my favourite games of the year. It's not a big epic action blockbuster. It was a fairly small, well-rounded, beautifully lit dungeon crawler. And I'm really, really hoping that we get a sequel or a prequel or something else in the same vein, maybe in a different setting, from this developer. Because I really, really enjoyed Vaporum, which is why it makes number 3 on this list. Number 2, Darksiders 3. Surprise! A lot of people are hating on Darksiders 3 for not being enough like the previous games in the series, which were, you know, Legend of Zelda, Prince of Persia, inspired, I don't want to say clones, but inspired by, certainly, with God of War style combat, and going for a more Metroid-inspired world design with a little bit more of a kind of Dark Souls-like feel. As somebody who platinumed Bloodborne and the Old Hunters, and who I think I've been fairly vocal at exclaiming that Bloodborne is my favourite game ever, despite preferring generally Metroidvania games over anything else. None of the criticisms of Darksiders 3 from a gameplay perspective have rang particularly true to me. It's not without its issues, but the combat and the feel of it really was never one of them. As I said all the way through my playthrough on YouTube, I put it on the challenging difficulty, I got a challenging experience, I got what I wanted. And considering the game was made by a much smaller studio than the, in my opinion, rather bloated Darksiders 2, I actually rate the third game almost as highly as I do the first one, and I feel it actually benefits from that tighter focus, the more interesting and smaller and interconnected world, plus the removal of the rather irritating random weapon drops. Is it perfect? No. There are a few things that they cut, like extra trainable combat moves like you get for War and Death, the execution moves from the first game. I'd have liked to have seen those existing in this one, but in general, with its balance of elemental hollows and the movement abilities that come with them and the options that you've got, I really enjoy the combat in this game. It feels like it rewards good timing and skill. And it's not Dark Souls combat. A lot of people said, oh yeah, it's Dark Souls combat. It's not Dark Souls combat at all. There's no stamina bar in this. You know, you can spam attacks to your heart's content. It's not Dark Souls combat. It's nowhere near as hard or as unforgiving as Dark Souls combat. Maybe it was right at the start before they patched it a couple of times and fixed a few things. But certainly after patch number 1, is nowhere near Dark Souls level of combat. So we've got good music, good world design. In my opinion, apart from the odd bit of kind of dodgy voice acting every now and again, got a decent story with an excellent character arc for our main character. I think a lot of people's criticisms for the game is going to be, oh, I didn't like the character, how the character started out. Yeah, you've got to finish the game to see the whole arc of the character. There's plenty of secrets. There's loads of hidden upgrades to find. In fact, I was playing the game yesterday and found something that I'd not found before in any of my runs. So there are things hidden around everywhere. There are plenty of enhancements to improve your weapon and to improve the build diversity and allow you to play your own way, which increases replayability. And as many people seemingly have discovered, there's a lot of speedrunning potential in the game as well. Now, speedrunning is not a thing that I'm particularly interested in, but I do like watching people who do this kind of thing, finding all of these glitches and the possibilities for getting through the game in a much faster way and route than I myself would have taken. So yeah, great game, well-placed story, some cool twists, some really nice visuals. I'm really hoping we get the 4th game, but you know, a lot of people have panned Darksiders 3 as not being enough like the first 2. And I think if we don't get a 4th game, it will be their fault, really. I would be quite happy with another Darksiders 3. I don't think we'll get another Darksiders 3, because I think for Darksiders 4, where Strife will be the main protagonist, it's going to be more gun-heavy combat, and I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do that, but I don't think either the Zelda-style, God of War-style stuff from games 1 and 2, or the Fury-style, more whip-based range combat from 3, I don't think any of those will work for Strife. So I'm not entirely sure how there is any way all these people saying, oh, for Darksiders 4 they need to go back to what made 1 and 2 successful. I don't think they can do that and still have a combat system that makes sense. Maybe Gunfire Games will come up with a way. I don't know. But either way, I do hope we get the 4th game, and maybe even that 5th game where things will be rounded out. I've got my fingers crossed. Some honourable mentions just before we get to the number 1, and if you've got this far, you know what the number 1 is going to be. Honourable mentions from games that I've played this year. Headlander, really fun, really silly, made me laugh a lot. Life is Strange 2, Part 1, very enjoyable, very emotional. Not quite as long as I would have liked, but good stuff. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's an Assassin's Creed game. It's a big open world game. Surprise, surprise, I haven't got anywhere near finishing it, and other things have distracted me, including work, but also other computer games. The Messenger, which I am going to get back to in the new year. Greece, which I've uploaded 1 episode of onto the channel already, and again do intend to go back to in the new year when I've got a little bit more time. All of those games, honourable mentions, really enjoyable, even though I haven't necessarily completed them yet. But number 1, God of War. God of War is the only PS4 game on this list, and I predicted that it would be number 1 way back when I completed it, all the way back in May. It is a satisfying, visceral, visually stunning game with an emotional, impactful story, some genuine surprises, and a lot of passion clearly put into every aspect of it. I played and or streamed a good chunk of God of War 2018, and I can honestly say there wasn't a single element of the game that annoyed me. And thinking back to it now as I write this script, I really can't remember anything that stood out as, oh my god, this is terrible, I hate it. In fact, I've been saying for a few months now that the game does come incredibly close to Bloodborne for the title of best game ever, and sometimes when I try and match them side by side, it might even be a better game. Especially if they don't ever remaster Bloodborne so it can be played at 1080p and 60 FPS. The story of the game, of Kratos and Atreus' journey to the highest peak in the realms to scatter their mother's ashes, is not the most epic sounding of stories, and yet there is so much packed into the game that I'd be hard pressed to think of something with a better value and impact story-wise. If it hadn't been for the fact that I lent the game to my best mates to play through a few months ago, I'd have probably played it again once or twice by now, which admittedly would probably have meant far fewer videos on other games on this channel. But he's played it through and he absolutely loves it as well. So it's got recommendations from both of us as one of the best games we played this year and possibly for the last couple of years. In a video game market where epic single player games are apparently struggling to get made because they're quote unquote not worth it to the big publishers, and microtransaction riddled multiplayer online titles are very much the norm, I am very glad to say that God of War bucks the trend, and I can't wait to see what happens in the sequel that surely, after the success of this one, that surely must be coming. So there we go. That is my top 10 list of games I played in 2018. Remember, these are games that I played. There were a lot of games that I didn't play or didn't get anywhere near to finishing. It is fair enough if you don't agree with the list, either the games that you like that aren't on it, that you think should have been on it, or any kind of jazz like that. But as I said, this is my personal opinion. You can disagree with me in the comments if you want, but don't just dislike the video because you think it's a bad video just because you don't like the list. I hope that every single one of you watching this, especially those of you who sat through it, because it's a lot longer than I expected this to turn out, I hope you all have an excellent 2019, and I will be back with some new content in the new year. You've got Grease and The Messenger to look forward to. You've got my first playthrough of Axiom Verge, as well as the latest Tomb Raider game, which I picked up in the Steam sale for Christmas, as well as Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, and some coverage of Epic Games' Hades as well. That is in early access. Plus a load of other stuff, because I do plan to keep on releasing videos on pretty much anything that I can get my hands off. Oh, and of course there's going to be some more Darksiders 3 content, mostly story related stuff, but that's taking some time to write, but I'll get there. Thank you very much for your support over the last few months. It has meant a great deal to me, and hopefully you'll stick with me as we go into the new year. Hope you have a good one, everybody, and until next time, toodle pip.